Welcome back to the Means Report, everybody. So as we celebrate Representative Carlton Howard's return from the Middle East, we need to find out why the conflict is happening there in the first place. And I can't think of a better person to walk us through all of that than Dr. Craig Albert. He is a longtime Means Report friend. He directs the Master of Arts in Intelligence and Security Studies at Augusta University. Dr. Albert, thank you so much for helping us understand this international issue.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I think back to the Saturday morning, I believe it was, in early October, when news broke of a conflict between Hamas and Israel. To me, it seemed to come out of the blue. Was it unexpected, or had something been building?
Well, we know that Hamas had been exploring ways to get into Israel for anywhere between 6 months and 2 years. But the situation had been escalating for almost 15 years now because of various events that have been occurring. And the first is you have the Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip, which is about 15 years old. So they were blocking main supplies, checkpoints from anybody moving freely in and out, as well as supplies from moving in and out of the Gaza Strip. Israel's reasoning behind this is we're trying to stop terrorists from infiltrating the state proper of Israel. And Hamas was saying, you can't do this, like you're hurting civilians. So Hamas said this was a retaliation from the blockade. And then you have a couple other reasons as well that kind of showed the determination of Hamas to strike back against Israel. And one of those is that there has been some limitations of visits to the Al-Aqsa Mosque inside Jerusalem by Muslims. So go ahead.
When you say Hamas, should I picture Palestinians, or are they separate?
So Hamas is a terrorist organization housed inside Palestine. They don't represent Palestinian civilian citizens. They don't represent Islam. They're akin to Al-Qaeda, right? They're just a fundamentalist Islamic sect that they do reside in Palestine, but they have nothing to do with the Palestinian citizenry themselves.
Okay, so this isn't Palestine versus Israel. It's Hamas versus Israel.
It's Hamas versus Israel, and if you look at the casualty figures, Hamas versus Palestinian citizens themselves, because most of the people that are getting hurt on this are Palestinian civilians, because Hamas is blowing things up in Palestine and in Israel, and so it's the citizens that are dying.
All right, that's extremely helpful. So this Gaza area, whether it's the Strip or Gaza proper, that's where Hamas lives. That's where Palestinians live.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. I mean, I know to you it probably sounds basic, but it's helpful.
Of course not.
What's the U.S.'s role and or interest in all of this?
Well, Israel is the United States, one of their top 5 closest allies in the world, and certainly in the Middle East, the #1 ally. Israel is a quasi-democratic state. There's some issues with Palestinian rights, which is why they're not a fully democratic state, and which is one of the notes that Hamas has against Israel, is that they say Israel doesn't have or grant full rights to all Palestinians. Israel, of course, disagrees with that, so there's some contention there. But for the United States, Israel's the closest to a democracy, the closest to an ally the United States has there, period. So any threat to Israel, the United States sees as a direct threat to the United States as well.
All right, so maybe some people would think, why doesn't America just take action on behalf of Israel and end this right now? Well, in my point of view, from my perspective, if you look at the globe, there are a lot of huge countries around Israel that we should probably be careful with. Is that accurate?
Absolutely.
Russia, China?
Everybody has a stake in this. So if the U.S. just went into the ground to help Israel here, you're looking at possibly World War III, certainly a regional war. And you've already had states like Iran say, the United States, don't do this. If you do anything to help Israel, something's going to happen to you. Egypt, which is a quasi-ally of the United States, has also said you don't enter this. This is stay out. This is not you. There's been attacks against U.S. forces still in Iraq right now this week, based from Iranian militias inside Iraq against the U.S. forces. So if the U.S. does anything too heavy-handed, you're looking at a direct threat to the U.S. from these groups as well.
It seems like a lot of U.S. presidents have tried to broker peace in the Middle East, and some have succeeded, it seems, at least in the short term. Can that be achieved?
If I give you an answer right now, hopefully I'll win the Nobel Peace Prize for it, because you certainly would. But it's a complicated situation. at root, you have political differences here, but you also have identity issues between the two sides. You have religious issues between the two sides. And one of these issues being the location and who should own the Al-Aqsa Mosque if you're Muslim, or the Temple Mount if you're Jew. It's the same area. Mm-hmm. And it's the holiest site in all of Judaism, right? It's their holy site. It's where the old temple used to be in the Old Testament.
So you're talking about biblical times at this point.
Biblical times,
okay.
Right. And for Islam, it's one of their top 3 holiest sites outside of Saudi Arabia. And so you're talking about how do you negotiate the rights, the ownership, visitation, who has access to visit this site and when they have access to visit this site. How do you negotiate these type of religious questions? I mean, how do you negotiate if you think your God is on your side, right, these types of issues?
Let me ask you, just to look into your crystal ball, and I know this is probably unanswerable, how long do you think this fighting will continue?
If Hamas releases the hostages they have, which last count was about 199 hostages, Israel might not go fully with a land invasion. However, this is the akin of 9/11 against the United States. So I'm not sure if everybody understands the gravity of this situation. It was up to 2,900 Hamas fighters that invaded into 12 miles of Israeli territory. So you can imagine if anybody invaded the United States with 3,000 military members and got 12 miles into, from the north or the south, there's no way the United States wouldn't retaliate with all force necessary. And so that's what Israel says it's going to do, is retaliate with everything they have, land, sea, and air units.
All right, that really does bring it into the proper perspective. What about the day of jihad that was declared for Friday, October 13th? It didn't seem like anything happened. Were you, or should we have been concerned about that?
I was personally concerned about it.
Yeah, I was too. I was scared.
I texted my friends and said, hey, this is something serious. Be careful of this. They issued a proclamation saying, fight the Jews, fight the Americans, fight anybody in the West on this day. Thankfully, nothing big happened here. In Israel, however, there were some issues. You saw many more strikes from Hezbollah in Lebanon against Israeli forces, and you saw West Bank flare-ups, which is on the other side of Israel, which is also controlled by the Palestinian Authority. And so you saw lots of settlers on the Jewish side fighting against militants, terrorists, and even civilians on the Palestinian side. And so you saw a large number of hostilities on the West Bank because of that, and they're still happening. So now, because of that, you have on the east and western side of Israel, and from the north on Lebanon with Hezbollah, you have 3 sides basically that Israel is fighting against and preparing against in case something happens very seriously.
Are there humanitarian considerations by anyone in this conflict where they would say, look, we know that we don't like each other and probably want to annihilate one another, but let's be careful of the innocent folks?
I think both sides are given talking points on that, but we have to be, when you're dealing with a terrorist group like Hamas, I mean, they went after, took hostages from Israeli citizens. So we know there's over 1,000 dead on the Israeli side just from that original invasion. A very small percentage of them were military figures. Mm-hmm. Most of them were civilians. So if Hamas says we have to watch out for civilians, it's like, no, we can't take your word for it. Israel also puts state security above civilians' lives usually. So if Hamas is hiding in an apartment building that there are Palestinian civilians in, Israel will do what it can to get those civilians out by dropping leaflets saying, please leave, we're going to bomb you in an hour. But most of the time, where are they going to go? They don't have a way to get out. They have no electricity, they have no vehicles. So most of the time they stay there. And Israeli, to their word, bombs and they kill civilians. So this is a terrible situation on both sides. Now the United States and some of the United States' allies is trying to create humanitarian corridors for civilians to get out. But again, here in America, we're like, well, get in your car and leave. But not everybody drives. It's a very poor, depleted area, and people just don't have the right to travel the way we do in the West. They don't have the means to travel. They don't have a steady income. They've been blockaded, and jobs are cut off for 15 years now at this point. So it's hard for civilians to get out, and Hamas takes advantages of that.
You make a great point. We had a Georgia lawmaker on in our first segment, Representative Carlton Howard, who barely made it out. So think of impoverished people, how tough it is for them, as you just said. Probably 1 or 2 more questions, and I probably should have asked this first because it impacts all of us, I think. There's some horrible stuff on social media right now about this conflict. I don't want to see the images that are popping up on Twitter. Dr. Albert, how much of that is real? How much of it is propaganda? And should we just turn our phones off for a few months when it comes to social media?
Yes, is the answer to all of that. There is, on all sides, the propaganda. There's misinformation, disinformation, there's propaganda, there's truth propaganda. So often they're just showing videos of what actually happened, and depending on what side you are, if you're Hamas, you're showing actual videos of Hamas atrocities. They're doing it for recruiting. So they're just showing their videos for recruitment purposes. The same way ISIS did when they started things in 2014 around in Mosul. They're saying, look, we can destroy the enemy, please join us. Israel is showing those same videos from their perspective, saying, look at how terrible and horrendous Hamas is. They're killing innocent Israelis for absolutely no reason, according to the state of Israel, right? So that's propaganda, but it's truth. There's nothing deceitful about just posting those images. It's how you contextualize that. On the other hand, you have disinformation and misinformation, especially from Hamas. So anytime something serious blows up or any civilians are dying, they're blaming the state of Israel. When it turns out, when we look at open source intelligence collection methodologies, that those rockets, let's say from this recent hospital bombing, the United States has already declared that that was from an Islamic Jihad, another terrorist organization inside the Palestinian territories, that launched a rocket that failed and blew up over that hospital. We've already confirmed it. That did not come from the state of Israel. But because the first 48 hours from that happening, Hamas said it was from the state of Israel, the world thinks it's Israeli. And so now the world turned against Israel, and you have all these protests worldwide now against Israel because of that one event, which is misinformation.
A very fast 11 and a half minutes. I knew it would be, but thank you for clarifying so many points for us today, Dr. Albert.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it. Dr. Craig Albert, our special guest. When we come back, how you can shape future editions of the Means Report. Stay with us.